So welcome to CalTv, sponsored by Calvary Robotics, Advancing Automation. We're really excited to have today's session. We've got a very special guest, a leader in our industry with one of the leading companies in the world, Fanuc Robotics. Our very special guest, a dear friend, certainly one of the coveted leaders in the market, Mr. Mike Cicco, the president and CEO of Fanuc Robotics. Welcome, Mike. Nice to have you with us.
Joe, my friend, it's very good to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Mike, before we get into some of the questions, we want to talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic and what that's meant for the industry, automation industry. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and Fanuc, if you would.
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here on CalTv with you. So again, my name is Mike Cicco. I've been the CEO of Fanuc for about 3 years now. I've been with Fanuc for over 21 years, really came up through the engineering rank. So I cut my teeth programming robots early on, and I really spent my entire career in the automation field. From a Fanuc perspective, as you mentioned, we're a leader in the industry, not just in robotics, but also CNC controls, as well as a small line of machine tools ourselves. And so it's been really great to bring that as part of our portfolio here in North America and offer that to the customers. So Fanuc overall, when customers ask us what we do, we say we help solve manufacturing challenges. And it aligns great with Calvary. It aligns really well with our integrator network in general. And it's my passion, and it's what I love. So I'm blessed to be able to do what I love.
Well, Mike, thanks for sharing that. And as you said, it's a more diverse company than maybe some of our audience would know. So it's good that you shared that with them. In addition, the diversity of the market you serve is pretty wide. So we certainly can learn a lot about the different industries through the Fanuc and what they do in helping manufacturing across multiple industries. But today we want to talk a little bit more about the pandemic. And maybe before we get into some more specific questions, if we could start with kind of an overview. What's your overall impression of the impact of this pandemic and on the automation industry, the implementation of automation in North America?
It's a really good question. Obviously, you and I have been living this, as well as everybody's been living this for the last 5 months now, maybe a little bit longer. And the effect to us has been interesting. As you mentioned, we're in a lot of different diverse industries. And if you look at the automotive industry that we're in, that industry halted instantly with the pandemic. I mean, shutting down plants, shutting down factories. And so that part of our business really got hurt pretty quickly, as well as a lot of others when the pandemic started. But one of the great things about the automation industry and about manufacturing in general is advanced manufacturing in general is when something like this happens, how quickly we can react. And it was not a few days after the shutdown happened, and we were trying to sort out what part of our business was essential business, what part of our business was non-essential, how many people we needed to be back for various things. And we started getting calls. I mean, the phone started ringing of, hey, I want robots to help build ventilators. I want robots to help build masks. I need robots to put together test kits or swab kits, or even companies that were already manufacturing those things. The phone started ringing from a service perspective of saying, hey, you guys are open, right? Because, I'm running my equipment 24/7, and I need to make sure that if something happens, you're here to support us. And so when the pandemic actually really hit, it was a really positive thing to see how our team reacted here at Fanuc to be able to supply things, and then how others, yourself included, at Calvary, reacted by meeting the needs of the industry and seeing what we could supply within this pandemic to help. And I got to say, just in the April, May, June timeframe, that quarter, the second quarter, we saw a large growth in robot sales during that time, almost exclusively due to orders related to the pandemic, to do various things to help with the pandemic, which really has a good feeling overall.
I can imagine, and even areas where we probably didn't think about before, like hand sanitizers. Whoever was making that was making it. It was certainly a product they supplied to the industry, yet all of a sudden there was this big boom that they had to scale for and had tried to manage that. Even Lexan today, Lexan is in every supermarket, every store, every pharmacy, just to protect the interaction between people and allow us to be able to to, try to live as much a normal life. So the companies who are making those things, I'm sure, was a dramatic impact. And regarding that in automation, we've heard discussions about this pandemic actually having an effect of accelerating automation in North America. Is there evidence of that actually happening? And if so, why do you think that is?
So I think we're going to see a couple things. I would say right now, what I see might be a little bit of a short-term bubble of, people really need to ramp up to try to handle the pandemic as it sits today, and we're in the midst of seeing that. So we've kind of have the business that we normally do in outside of automotive and in general industry business, and we saw a big ramp up in this pandemic, and I'm treating that a little bit short-term because a lot of those increase in lines is gonna need to happen right now. But to your question, there will be a long-term change, I think, in what happens in manufacturing, not just in America, not just here, but all over the world, of what happened because of this pandemic. I'm sure that there's some people that might be listening that experience, if there's any manufacturers that are listening to this, if they had any sort of supply chain that was coming from Asia or from Mexico or from Canada, that got severely impacted when this happened. And I think people are going to think twice about that from a supply chain standpoint. And then I think this is going to also impact people from a resource standpoint too, of just trying to keep people more spaced out, keep people safer within their assembly process, and using robots and automation looks like a good way to do that for a lot of folks.
That's a good point. I wanted to touch on that with you. So this impact on existing markets, existing industries, do you think the companies, the managers of these companies, the people that are managing infrastructure, do you think that changes their planning going forward? That not the short term, as we talked about, but even the midterm, long term, of how to scale, where they should scale, what they do. Do you think that will have an impact? In a sense, if so, how?
Yeah, I think the supply chain is going to be impacted. I think large companies are smart enough not to be so reactive and completely move the needle. But I think a level of diversification is going to happen where companies that had maybe a single source supply chain from a single country or from a certain area, that they might diversify that a little bit and try to get things more locally at times, or broaden the horizons about where they're going to be. So I think across the different markets, depending on what industry that you're in, we'll see varying levels of that. It's going to be certainly harder in some areas than others, but I think we're going to see both a short-term and then a mid and long-term change as well.
And I think it's a valid point. I mean, some companies have indicated publicly that the localized supply chain is going to become more important to them and how they manage that. But certainly, as you say, some of these global companies need to still manage within the countries they're operating. So they still need to have a supply chain structure that can support their busises. There has been some discussions. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just making the point that a lot of people are looking at the pandemic and saying, oh, all of this is going to change because of the pandemic. And it's probably good to note and remember that a lot of this has been changing for a long time, not really just because of the pandemic. It may have highlighted it or accelerated it in some ways, but the concept of reshoring or localizing or diversifying a supply chain, all of those concepts, the pandemic hasn't created those concepts. It's really just maybe accelerated them too. So, we've been working for a long time in terms of when things shifted to overseas and lower cost countries, reshoring and bringing things here has been happening for a long time. But I do think the pandemic is going to accelerate some of that. But I think it's good to note that this isn't a new concept, really. It's just maybe something that we're talking about a little bit more because of what's happening today.
And I would echo, I absolutely agree. I think some of the economic reasons for it, the closer to the end customer and how to manage that, all those things were playing into that long before the pandemic. It probably did accelerate it, as you pointed out, but certainly there were things in play prior to the COVID effect and what that's done in the more recent past. Mm-hmm. So there has been some discussion that new markets will come out of this unprecedented situation. Do you expect that to be true? And if so, what areas do you think would be impacted by?
Yeah, I think, again, maybe along the same lines before that, I think overall in automation, new markets are always happening. We're always looking for ways to handle things. And I think the pandemic is maybe going to highlight a little bit more on the employee safety side of the market. So you might look into where you have a tremendous amount of people jam-packed into a certain area, and the spread of, even when the pandemic hopefully is over soon, just the spread of even the flu may be prevalent in certain areas. So one of the things I think about, it's not really related to automation, is it's just how many companies went to like an open workspace concept that now really seems to be kind of challenging when you're looking at not spreading disease around and you're having people shoulder to shoulder in an open space. And I relate that to some of the companies that we all go into. And when you're looking at areas where you have employees shoulder to shoulder, trying to do a repetitive, kind of dull, dirty, dangerous, all the D's task. So I think that those are some of the areas that are going to be affected coming out of this. The more automation, we're going to see that, for trying to keep the employees safe and maybe distance out some more.
I would agree. I think even having, you think about a production line with, 6 people on the line, having a person and a robot and then a person and a robot, et cetera, will kind of give a natural default opportunity for people to be a little bit social distancing, yet still keep the productivity and the people involved in that process, and maybe get even more productivity out of having larger, throughput. So I think you're right. Those are some of the areas that we'll see changes going forward. So shifting a little bit, but around that topic, many companies are still asking workers, as I know you are, we are, to do, when they can, their jobs remotely, or continue to do so. And do you see this having an impact on, say, FANUC or your go-to-market strategy? And again, if so, how?
Yeah, our headquarters is here in Michigan. Actually, Joe is sitting like right next to me. Actually, this side, if you look at it this way. So we're spaced out into different rooms here. So we're experiencing this strategy here in terms of remote working. But here we're in the state of Michigan, and there's a lot of manufacturing that happens here. And when our government allowed manufacturing to restart, obviously our essential business workers were always here. But when our governor allowed the manufacturing business to really turn on with social distancing restrictions, but still turn on, we started cycling people back into the workplace. And it's been an ongoing process of what works, what doesn't work, what kind of safety measures we have. So I think that the concept of remote work is applicable in a lot of areas. For us specifically, I mean, we deal with physical things. We deal with robots that help people. We deal with machine tools that help people. And so when you deal with something physical, I think a lot of those things are difficult to do from home. And as such, we've brought really our full team of engineers back here. But even what we're doing here with, creating this podcast episode, I think we've seen some of the benefits where when we say host a training session or when we host a sales meeting, our facility here, we can seat maybe 200 people in our auditorium, which was a limitation for us. But some of these tools that we're using now with remote work, the last technical training session we had 700 people on it. And so you think about how many more people you can touch and the changes in travel and things like that. So I think there's going to be pros and cons. I honestly, my personal opinion is I think that that maybe too many people are still at home and they're itching to get out and get back into a workplace somehow. But you've got to do that in the right way. It's like you don't leave home without this thing. I got one sitting next to me all the time right now, but I think that people are going to have to start transitioning back to some level of a face-to-face environment, because I think the level of efficiency is challenging from home. I think that's been a big challenge, and we're trying to overcome it every day.
Yeah, and you're right. There's positive and negatives to every situation. As you said, now you can get a larger audience, but we're social beings. We like the opportunity to talk around the cooler, and some good ideas can come from that, or the coffee machine. And certainly that's, as you say, affects some of our efficiency. It's a limiting factor, but there's pluses too, for sure. And as you say, the safety of the employees is certainly critical going forward. I know you and we spent a lot of time visiting factories, et cetera. It wasn't all that long ago. You could go to a factory and they didn't ask if you had safety glasses or if you had hearing protection or steel toe shoes. But certainly over the last 10 years, almost every single place I go today, that's the question they ask, or they hand them to you. You have to have these safety glasses. You have to. So we may see some of that where you have to have a safety mask going forward, even if and when there's a vaccine that takes care of protecting us. They still may have to have some of these protective situations in place and to make sure that they keep their employees safe. So they may see some changes from that going forward. Well, I guess it remains to be seen.
Right.
So would you have any advice for organizations on best practices dealing with this remote work environment? Because it's not going away tomorrow. It certainly hopefully will over time. But would you have any advice you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is that you always want to be trying things. I think back to March, right? So in the middle of March, whenever it was, when everything shut down, I know that at that time, when I sat down with my whole staff and we were trying to figure out what are we going to do next, because our governor came on and said, you're not allowed to go to work the next day. And what are we going to do? There is no way, 0%, that I thought that sitting here in September, we'd be in the situation we are now. So that was 6 months ago that happened. And I would have thought 6 months ago, there is no way that we'd be sitting here like this today. And then 3 months ago, I wouldn't have thought that either. So my advice to people is that you've got to think of multiple scenarios about how things are going to be in the future. So I have a mindset where we're going to be wearing masks all through next year. So 12 more months, 15 more months of wearing masks. What does that look like to your organization? And so all of that leads up to, I think that companies need to start trying things. I will say that the playbook that we have in place, which is 48 pages long, but it breaks down to fairly simple of wear masks, keep a distance from people, wash your hands. I mean, there's a lot of things in there. The conference room that obviously you're sitting in next to me, in the conference room that I'm in right now, have a lot less chairs in it than they normally did. But the playbook we've proven that it works. We've been back to work for, I think 4 months now, and we haven't had any spread. We've proven that this works. And so my advice would be is I think organizations, because I do think that this is going to last a lot longer than even maybe we think now, that we should try, or people should try to start cycling people back in, try to experimenting with other things. Of thinking that this is going to end quickly is probably the wrong thought process now. And so if there's areas of the business that are struggling because of the work from home, I'd encourage people to try it. And then the other thing is, and I was just with another customer this morning talking about this, is some of the advice that we gave to our employees when they were home, and some of the things that I've seen from others now is take advantage of this time. So if you have employees at home that maybe can't be 100% effective, think about all the things that you weren't able to do when you're at work full time, working 120%. Focus on training, focus on building up some of the soft skills that may be more challenging to do. I mean, obviously it has to be done remotely, but we offer remote training classes. We offer live instructed remote training classes where you'd be being instructed by a teacher remotely. And so think about all those things that maybe if your folks aren't 100% effective because they're at home and you can't bring them back to the office for whatever reason, try to focus on some of the other things that we never ever seem to have the time to do during normal times that we could take advantage of these times to do.
Great advice. And I again echo that point. I've talked to our team too about take advantage of training, take advantage of contacting people and staying in touch with it. You haven't had, the opportunity to, this is a great time to take advantage of that, when you have that, I'll say, free time in front of a computer. So it sounds like you playbook together. It sounds pretty solid, and you got a plan together. Could you characterize anything you thought was the biggest challenge of putting this together? Having conference rooms and less chairs, certainly are things that, logical things to do. What would you say was a really challenge to try to make this work?
Probably the easiest question, but the hardest to actually experience. It's the people. When something like this happens, you have people from every part of the spectrum. This side, everywhere in between. You have folks running that spectrum. And so, and you know, as a business leader like yourself, we always want to keep everybody happy. And so, you know, you think about the priorities. Health and safety of your people, number one. So you need to keep everybody safe. But you know that you can't employ everybody if you can't keep the business going either. And so then you start thinking about, you know, well, how effective is everybody? How's the business going? What can we do to get better? You couple all of that with the mindset that all the employees have from this side to this side of, you know, I'm very, very concerned about COVID and the effect that it has on my family, to this whole thing is made up and I don't believe that any of it's even a problem. And so you kind of have individuals for that whole span of that. And I would say that the way to help that is to talk to people. And that's one of those benefits of, you know this, I normally would travel to Japan almost every month to go back to our parent company, and not being able to do that now. One of those things for me, my free time, is to be able to talk to our people. And that has really helped out a lot of just, especially when we were cycling people back in, of just pulling people aside, holding town hall meetings, walking the floor, and just talking to people, and, you know, going through what their concerns are, talking about what we have in mind of how to keep people safe, understanding that the backs of people's ears hurt because of the masks all the time, and trying to find better ways to do that. So those are the challenges. Is really just, I lost sleep every night about making sure that our people would stay safe. And I'm happy that it has worked out thus far in terms of the measures that we have in place. I have a huge, amazing team of people that have really been working tirelessly since March on this, but that's been keeping the people safe and keeping everybody informed is been the biggest challenge for sure.
Yeah, and we certainly experienced the same thing. And you characterize it perfectly. That spectrum of understanding or belief, or what they understood was going on in their lives, and trying to talk to them and recognize it. And actually, it builds a little bit more teamwork and coming together and try to communicate how we can, work so that everybody stays safe, but everybody's concerns are addressed. Certainly, you're right. It was a challenge for us, but we also addressed it very similar to you. So good to hear, and great advice. Thanks.
Yeah, likewise. Good job.
Thanks. So I'm going to shift a little bit, but again, around the same main topic. So most, if not all, in-person, I'll call it, trade shows have been postponed or canceled for 2020. How do you think this will affect the trade show activity for the future?
Maybe still a little bit yet to be determined, to be honest, in my side. It has been an interesting thing to see how quickly we've been able to pivot. I mean, what we're sitting on here right now with this podcast, and your picture, my picture next to each other. And, I don't think our companies, my company or your company, have had this kind of technology till COVID. Maybe you guys have, but we certainly did. And we've invested in that. And so, a little bit of a plug for us. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this on your thing, but we have a virtual show coming up. A lot of Calvary videos are going to be highlighted through that. So we're going to experiment with it as well. Obviously, a lot of the big trade show organizations between A3 and AMT and PMMI have created virtual events, and then a lot of us as robot OEMs and integrators have created virtual events. So ours is coming up in the middle of October. And we're going to wait and see on that. I think the jury's still out in terms of what the effectiveness of those are. I will say that I think that this year is going to be the year that it's the best year to do it, because that no one's going to go to a trade show anyway. So the results that we get now are going to be the best, or the most telling, I think, in terms of how it could be the best it could be, because there is no other alternative. There is no trade show to go to, so you're going to do what's out there right now. I'm really impressed with the way we've been able to do it. Earlier today, you and I were talking about virtually touring our facilities, and I think that's really a great thing, because obviously travel's tough, and so I think some of these virtual trade shows are going to be good to be able to show people what a facility looks like without actually having to be there. But like I said in the beginning, what our job is to help people do better at manufacturing. That's what our job is. And if we can do that through a virtual trade show or a virtual event, then I think that might shift things a little bit. But I do fundamentally believe that human beings are social, as you mentioned, and so I don't think that there's going to be a time when we don't have trade shows, or I would say I'm going to be really sad if there is a time when we don't have trade shows, because I fundamentally believe that we need to be close to each other and show emotion and share things physically with our customers. That's the way to get to know people better. So I think there will be trade shows again. They might be a little different. They might be a little more, maybe they're smaller, maybe people's booths are smaller, maybe the investment's a little bit different, but I do think they will be back, but it might take some time. It may take longer than we think it would.
And I agree, and I'll touch on that a bit. I think, like you mentioned, you can have now conferences where at some of these trade shows there might have been 500 people in the audience, but that's all you could fit. So maybe with this component of virtual impact, maybe you'll have 500 people in that conference and another 1,000 that are, streaming in from a virtual kind of interface and conference. So there may be some benefits we gain from that. Another thing I've noticed, and you probably have too, and I think it's really good as professionals and organizations, they're sharing best practices across these. Some of the ones you mentioned, the PMI, the A3, they're sharing best practices, sharing challenges, so they can learn from each other and help each other. So I think that's a positive. But I do absolutely agree with social animals, and I can't imagine that we won't look for that opportunity in the near future, at least in the future, to have the ability to be together again, to take a look at what technologies are there. And you think about, and I shared this with discussion with Jeff Bernstein, who's the president of A3, certainly working with, and I said, for many years now, you could essentially buy a car online. You could configure it, and you could buy a car online. Very few people that I know, or very few people actually buy them online, because you still want to go and the proverbial kick the tires. You want to know the organization you're working with. You want to know how it's going to be serviced, where they are, what it looks like, what their infrastructure looks like. So that's still true. And as you say, as suppliers to manufacturing, they still want to know what we are, what we look like. So I think that's still going to be relevant going into the future. It'll morph a little bit, as you say, maybe to something a little bit different, but not completely go away. Yeah. So I got one other question for you here. But looking back now over these last several months since the pandemic has impacted on America and what's going on in America, is there anything you would do differently in the future, knowing what you know now?
One of the things that maybe still a little too early to tell, but this is an interesting story. So a number of years ago, this is maybe a long time, 10 years ago, I interviewed a guy one time, and after the interview, he sent me a text message and said, "Thanks for the interview." And at that time, I thought that was the rudest, most inconsiderate, thing that someone could do. I would have written a letter, a handwritten letter, maybe a phone call, even worse, an email, but a text message, I couldn't believe it. And, I didn't give the guy a second look, to be honest. I mean, after that, it was kind of like, well, if that's the way you're going to treat this job interview, then, have that. So, but you fast forward to today, and it's one of the only ways we communicate, where I would, I do appreciate a handwritten letter. But it is something where I was either that guy or that young man was ahead of the times, or I was behind the times. And so I think in terms of doing things differently, we always need to look at technology like this. And I'm always sitting back considering whether or not what we're doing is behind the times or ahead of the times. And I'm not talking about the technology with robots. I think we're well ahead of the times in terms of what we produce and the things that we develop. I'm talking about more social things. And so in terms of doing things differently, one of the things that we lacked in the beginning was really a way to gauge people's effectiveness or gauge people's productivity when they were away. That we've been together for so long that we just naturally understood if you were productive or not. But then everyone goes away and they're in remote places, and it's hard to tell that. And so we're playing catch up a little bit now from that aspect of what the future is really going to look like. So in terms of doing things differently, that's probably it. Is trying to figure out whether we're with the times, behind the times, with some of these some of these things that we're doing. I think we've made up a lot of ground in 5 months in terms of being comfortable on Zooms and not having to say, is everyone on mute, or can you see my screen, and all the stuff that everyone used to say when you'd get on some of these calls. But that's probably the biggest thing in terms of looking back on this is we should have embraced some of these technologies a little bit further. And I continually think about them. What do we need to do for the future to make sure we don't fall behind?
And so I'd like to have a conversation with you again 10 years from now, so we
Right.
can look back on this one and say, so what was that impact and what did it do? And look at the world today and how it's changed.
Well,
Anyway.
I can tell you one thing is, I hope that when we do that 10 years from now, we are actually face to face in the same room, and then we can do that. Then we don't have this white line between us of our videos. We can actually be next to each other when we're talking.
Exactly. And we can high five at the end.
Exactly.
So before we go, if you mentioned that you're having this virtual event, I think it's wonderful, and thank you for sharing that. So for our listeners that are tuning in, and they may want to be in touch with FANUC, can you at least help them? What's the best way for them to get in touch with FANUC going forward if they'd like to know more about your organization and the things you do?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Joe. So certainly, if you know your local salesperson, FANUC has a diverse group of salespeople all over North and South America, from FANUC America as well as all over the world. So if you know your local salesperson, that's really the best way to reach out. They can get you in touch with the proper systems integrator, like Calvary, that can help you with your issues or your manufacturing challenges. But if you don't know all those things, going to fanucamerica.com. Our website is really, really good to be able to look at all the different ways that we've helped people improve their manufacturing processes. And there's really great ways to fill out a form on there and say that this is you, this is what issues you're having right now, and can you help us solve those? And we will absolutely be right in touch with you and get you to the right people that can help. So talk to your local sales guy, or go to fanucamerica.com is the right way to do it. And I appreciate the opportunity to tell people that.
Thank you, and I appreciate you sharing that. I got one last burning question. I know most of my listeners will be asking. So is it FANUC or is it FANUC?
That's great. It's FANUC, right off the bat, FANUC. And a lot of people say FANUC, I think, and then people start thinking that we're a German company because it sounds German, but there may be a little secret there that not too many people know. But FANUC, the word FANUC is actually an acronym from our history that it stands for Fujitsu Automatic Numerical Control. And it goes back to when before FANUC, but really in the 1950s and 60s, FANUC and our honorary chairman, Dr. Esanaba, worked at Fujitsu in Japan, and a division of Fujitsu, they let him spin off a division of Fujitsu to work on numeric controls, which is a CNC control. And yeah, that's how we became FANUC.
Yeah, we consider him in our industry the father of that technology. So
that's right.
Thanks for sharing that little tidbit of trivia information. Again, thank you for being here. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to chat with you, get your thoughts, your ideas, and the impact of going in. We wish you continued success, and hope to see you again very soon on one of these CalTv discussions.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. Thanks a lot, Joe. Great to see you too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.